I'm Stoya. I've been some kind of performer for most of my life, and I wrote a book's worth of stuff called Philosophy, Pussycats, and Porn that Notacult published. Check out that sweet gold foil. I love that gold foil. And one of the things that I had to learn when I started promoting the book was how to give a compelling reading. And a lot of how I learned was fans generously taking the time to give me feedback on what worked and what didn't work. The first note was, "Hey, Stoya, you're not reading, you're giving a reading." And that's sort of the core of this workshop. So I'm going to demonstrate. First, I'm going to read, "Can we learn about privacy from porn stars?" And I'm going to try to mimic how I was when I started. I didn't expect to become a porn star. People rarely do. I was 19 years old and my photographer roommate had an offer from a website to buy some nude pictures. We did a shoot and then waited 2 weeks in case I woke up in a panic over the idea of releasing naked photos of myself into the world. But I didn't, and so I turned to the required paperwork. One of the boxes to fill in read, "Stage name, if applicable." Stage names are common in the entertainment industry, whether in Hollywood, rap, or pornography, and they're used for all sorts of reasons. But at a time when people can be whoever they like on the internet, when we're all negotiating who we are, in which setting, and for which audience, somehow the combination of a woman whose job is fantasy and her fantasy professional name can make people lose their minds. Consider the recent hysteria over the Duke University student who moonlights as an adult film starlet. Although it didn't take long after the news broke for her fellow students and strangers to gleefully post her legal name online, the Duke porn star, as she has been called by media outlets from Forbes to The Guardian, has tried to control what she is called where. She used the pseudonym Lauren when giving interviews and the pseudonym Aurora for her stage name in those same interviews. Finally, this week, she acknowledged her actual stage name, Belle Knox. The whole kerfluffle doesn't need to be as dramatic as people seem to think. For me, choosing a stage name felt less like concealing my identity, especially since I'd just turned over my social security number to strangers, and more like deciding on a username for any internet service or website. I chose Stoya because it was there. It was a diminutive of my grandmother's maiden name, and my mother had considered it before naming me after Jessica Savage, the news anchor. Spoken aloud, Stoya had a nice balance between femininity and strength. It felt rightfully mine because of the family history. An insurance agent owned the domain stoya.com, but I didn't think I'd ever need a website of my own. I wasn't a voluptuous sex symbol or exotic glamazon. How big could the market be for pasty young women with wacky sartorial tastes and wiry limbs? I expected my orifices to be viewable in high definition by anyone with an internet connection. I did not expect to have a career as a performer in hardcore videos, much less to see photos of myself on magazine covers or to be regularly recognized on the street. It would be ragingly narcissistic to assume that over 150,000 people would follow you on Twitter because of your work in pornography. But 8 years later, that's exactly what has happened. Not everyone performing in adult films uses a stage name. Tara Patrick has said she legally changed her name to match her professional one. A few use their whole legal name, others keep their given name while taking a suggestive or unique surname. Still more take Lover Star, sometimes with creative spellings, and I'd support a 10-year ban on any iteration of both. So you see how it's very rushed, and I'm in the book. The words are pretty okay, but I'm not here with you. So next, I'm gonna read Nudie Girl, which I have workshopped the hell out of. I've read it over and over to all sorts of rooms, and hopefully it'll be a little bit different. Murphy's Law of Inappropriate Behavior states that if you make a habit of taking your clothes off in public, eventually everyone in your family, including members so distant they share less DNA with you than a chimpanzee does with a cuttlefish, will somehow stumble upon documentation of what you're up to. My grandmother is a very smart woman, and I'd been dodging the question of what I did for a living for at least 3 professionally naked years. I really had been meaning to tell her about my job before she found out from the television or a newspaper, but I thought I'd do it when I was ready. Ready consistently being defined as any time except for right now. So I was completely unprepared when she called and said, "Your mother says that you're sort of like a model." I don't know what that means, because if you were a model, she would just say you're a model, and you're a bit short for that anyway. No offense, dear. What do you do with your days? I wished I'd discussed this inevitability with my mom or had some legitimate reason to get off the phone. My usually dodgy cell service was clear as a bell. I worried. What if I failed at easing her into the whole idea of my career in pornography and she had a heart attack, leaving me accidentally guilty of grand matricide? What if she decided to just cut me out of her life? More pressing, how was I supposed to explain what a modern pornographic actress was to a woman who doesn't know how to work a cell phone and still had typesetting tools laying around from her days in advertising? Well, do you remember Betty Page and Pinup? What I do is kind of like Pinup, but more explicit, like with no clothes on. Oh, so you're a nudie girl. Either I was hallucinating or that statement had been delivered in a positive tone. Yes, ma'am, but pop culture is a bit more edgy now than things were in the 50s. So I have actual sex with people and it goes on video or DVD. In the moving pictures. Do you enjoy it? I have fun. It's always interesting. I only do things that I want to do with people that I want to do them with. It's good. Well then, that's all very nice, and I'm glad to hear you're doing something you like. Since the conversation was going so well, I figured we might as well get everything over with at once. There's something else I should probably tell you while we're on the subject. Oh? In addition to being smart, my grandmother is an incredibly expressive woman. You know that Mehrabian's rule thing about how communication is 93% nonverbal? In my grandma's case, 99% of communication is pure vocal inflection. There's something in the way she draws out the vowels. They become a whole adventure. This particular O had started out some distance into curiosity land, passed over the gosh, what else could top the last thing mountains, and settled on the patiently waiting to hear more planes. I'm using your name as my stage name. Well, I'm using the Americanized diminutive. The point is, I'm using part of your name as my stage name. Vera. That's not very sexy. No, ma'am. I mean, I think Vera could actually be quite marketable with the current neo-burlesque scene, but I'm using Stoya. Oh. Oh. The first O was surprised, and the second O sounded less than enthused. In my head, I stared into the largest imaginable pit of uh-oh. I wondered if she could hear my heart pounding over the phone. My left hand frantically picked at the stitches on the hem of my shirt. I might be the one to have the heart attack, and I wasn't going to die without one last cigarette. I lit up, inhaled and exhaled again. Finally, I couldn't take the extended silence any longer. Grandma? I was just thinking. I hope none of the men at the nursing home get us confused and try to put my feet behind my head, because I don't bend that way anymore. And that is how I told my grandma that I was using her name as my stage name for porn. You'll notice that it's more like a monologue, if that makes sense. And the reason we do readings, the reason we do writing at all, is because we want to connect somehow. We want to express something. We want to reach people. We want to broaden their perspective. And you can take a lot from entertainment and acting and bring it into readings. especially right now. I don't know how many writers we have in the room, people who write themselves. I see a couple of heads nodding. So right now we're all sort of scrambling for like, how are we going to promote our work? And when someone comes historically to a reading, they understand you're a writer. You're not necessarily a performer. The writing is the job. Having a reading is a bonus. But now, thanks to COVID, we don't have those opportunities. And so when we're doing a reading online, we're competing with actors, hardened YouTubers who've been emoting at the camera for the past 15 years and like have it down to a science. And you wanna pull in some of the tricks of the trade that can be picked up from YouTubers, actors, and hopefully I can help some here today. Does anybody have any questions? I love questions so much. Let me check the chat. All right, going once, going twice. I will return to babbling. So the first thing, I'm wearing makeup. Not a lot of face stuff, but eyebrows and eyeliner, because when I make an expression, I want the camera to pick it up. And yes, it's beauty labor. Yes, it's still pretty gendered. Yes, makeup is annoying and might make your eyes itch, but that's one of the things that I do to help my expression, my literal physical expression, have more impact. Do you think it's effective to do the voices of other characters in a reading or too cartoonish? So this particular piece, I am 50% of the way that my grandmother sounds. Like, my dad's heard me read it and he's like, oh my God, you're not even doing it justice. Like, and I'm like, because I would look ridiculous if I tried to read it like she does, because she's so over the top. It really depends on your audience. So, so for instance, if I am at a reading that's put together by comic book people and they've literally had like a live reading of a short comic story, then I can go full cartoon. Like that's a great place for a piece like Nudie Girl. If I'm at some like serious sex work event, then I'm gonna keep it, I would read the privacy and porn stars piece, which I only did part of. Or I have a piece about this ballet dancer, Emma Livery, from the I want to say 1800s, comparing her story to one of the misguided California porn laws that like don't actually help. And that's a more serious piece, but I still have my moments. I know where I'm going to look at the crowd. I know which lines are to be emphasized. And you learn that through trial and error. And it's a lot like with writing, you have to find your own voice. And you find what works with your voice through feedback. And with readings, I found what works for each piece, again, through feedback. My roommate is a theater kid. He comes to a lot of my stuff. He gives me notes afterwards. So to directly answer your question, I think sometimes it's good to be cartoonish, and other times it's a little too much and you have to be able to read the room. However, literally right now in the COVID world we're living in, the whole internet is a hard audience, right? Because some people want to see cartoon and some people want to see serious, and everybody's like next, 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 because we're all kind of losing our minds with cabin fever. So I would, in the current situation, I would encourage being more emotive, because there's so much competition for attention right now. And if you're not immediately engaging, then people tend to wander off. I'm thinking of the cam rooms. I've been camming a lot. As soon as you're not like, people are like, okay, bye, Stoya. But also that audience is self-selected. Like, I tend to be a lot. So people who don't want a lot they don't stick around for very long, if that makes sense. How much work do you generally like to preview? How much is too much? And is there such a thing? I think it depends on the work. So the entirety of Philosophy, Pussycats, and Porn was available for free online at the time of publication. When we published, I took a lot of blogs down, a lot of the blog pieces. The op-ed pieces are still up on whatever platform they were originally published on. And I'd really like Daniel's insight as the publisher here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I like having work, like the main ethos of the work to be accessible as much as possible, and for people to be able to, if they feel drawn to study it further, to be able to then like find the product of it. So I like having just like your kernel of what you're trying to convey to the world available and accessible, and then you can expand from there.
I think for a book of fairly randomly collected essays, it's fine to preview a lot of it, because I get a lot of consumers who are like, hey, I want to buy your book even though I've read everything already, because I want to support it being a tangible object. I want you to have the numbers that'll give you the opportunity to write another book, things like that. Like, I have a lot of very I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. I'm not going to be able to do this succinctly, so here we go. A lot of my customer base is really intelligent, self-aware, fairly educated on subjects like capitalism. So they want to know, what do you make the most money on? Like, what do you get a kickback from? And then they vote with their dollars that way. And that's really great. For a reading, people start to get fidgety about 35 minutes in. And I think it's less about how much of the book you're giving away, and more about you want to stop reading around the edge of the point where they still want more. So once they start to get a little bit fidgety, you want to pull back and end it, so then they still have that feeling of curiosity, wanting more, all of that. And that's another, in person, that's another read the room thing. Like, when it's a live event, you're in the room with them. You can see them starting to like dig in their purse or like shift in their seat. And then you're like, oh, it's time to wrap it up. Thanks, guys. Guys, gals, non-binary humans, thanks for coming out. And then it's time to go. Oh, I have opened iMovie. That's gonna be a thing. Any tips on drop? Daniel, can you elaborate on dropping in?
Yeah, so it's like being on stage and then suddenly everyone is beam focused on you. That feels distracting. Like, and so you need to, like, comparing your two readings, it was so in the book, as you put it, and then the other one was more just this kind of conversational piece that you developed, and so you dropped into that piece. You were able to deliver the voice of that piece. That's what I mean by that, I suppose.
So there's a few things. One is rehearsal helps. It's, you know, I don't know about anyone else, but when I first started doing readings, I was like, oh, you show up, you read, boom. And that's not the case. It's a performance. So rehearsing, and there's an acting technique called baking it, that was first told to me when I was doing a play. I had this big long monologue. It was like a page and a half of just me telling this story. And one of the other actors was like, you have to bake it. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And they're like, every line, you want to have an image in your head. And so like Nudie Girl, it's really easy. I lived it. It's a story that occurred in my life. So it's really easy to go back there and hear Grandma Vera, oh, you're a Nudie Girl. It's, you know, it's in my head as it's happening. But for other pieces, you want to, so for instance, the Privacy and Porn Stars one, when I'm talking about Bell Knox, the move would be to have an image of this young woman trying to navigate this very complex layers of privacy. So you think of the young woman, you think of like you like go back to the time of when you were picking your own stage name. I go back to the time of when I was picking my own stage name, or like the monologue where I first learned that technique. I had to come up with images, like imagine the scenes that were being discussed. And it's really about rehearsal. And when you're doing readings, you find your pieces that work well, and then you are practicing them and you'll get better at them. Controlling pacing, there's a big difference between in-person readings and video live stream meetings. The pacing in a live room, the audience tells you what your pace is. Like, they laugh, they go like whatever it is, whatever the reaction is, they give it to you. And so you're like, oh yeah, I just said that line and now here's the laugh, and then I said that line and here's the gasp of, oh my God, you're using your grandma's name as your stage name. And it's another thing where the more you practice it, the more you know where those moments are, specifically when you're practicing in front of an audience. And live streaming or video, you want to at least bounce it off your roommate or your best friend or whoever is like on your team and willing to support you with feedback, because you still want to give space for the audience to have their reactions, right? We write to affect people, So when we're reading, we want them to have space to feel that effect. And that if you're trying to do a digital reading of something that you haven't done live before, getting a friend to help you figure out where those moments are is great. And you don't need as much of a moment because you're not waiting for the whole audience to finish laughing. Clearly, I prefer when people laugh. That makes me happy. I feel like I'm an entertainer. It's lovely. But a group tends to like set each other off. Like first, the person with the real hair trigger on their joy button, first they crack up. And then other people are like, someone's laughing, and it makes them laugh. And then they kind of like keep each other going for a little bit. So when it's digital, you don't have that kind of spread of feeling. And so you don't need to leave as much space. Breath is a hard one for me. I spent most of my adult life just breathing into my chest, and only maybe 5 years ago started actually breathing into my belly. I must say, belly breathing is great. There is so much more oxygen. I'm not as nervous. That's a good trick. Okay, so when you're nervous, you do chest breathing. It's just like up and down, and that perpetuates the nerves by letting your body do its nervous thing. It keeps you in the nervous place, which is not helpful. It's uncomfortable. I do have one piece where being nervous makes it more compelling. So I'll actually perform it nervous now. But breathing past your solar plexus into your belly, bonus points if you can breathe all the way into your pelvic floor, that calms your body down. And so when you notice yourself speeding up, when you notice that your breath is stopping here, taking a moment to just breathe is totally fine. The other thing that I've noticed about pauses and pacing, people are paying attention because they want to pay attention to a human. And humans have to breathe. So you wouldn't necessarily want to stop in the middle of a sentence if you can help it. But no one expects you to just words without a moment to take in some air. It's really okay to pause for a minute, to stop and take a drink of water. But you do want to know where your moments for that are. Ideally, you go into a reading knowing like, this is where I'm gonna stop to take a break, to take a breath. Gosh, this sentence is unwieldy. Why did I write this for myself? And where your good water breaks are. And keeping hydrated is really important when you're talking a lot. Otherwise, you end up with a dry throat and a weird cough that you're really trying not to let anyone see, and it just gets worse and worse, and you're like, and that's uncomfortable for everyone. So definitely your water. Oh, iMovie, leave me alone. I didn't mean to open you. Speaking of water, and wrangling nerves, it's hard to believe, but the audience is mostly on your side. That's the big thing. People, every once in a while someone drives by on the internet and acts like a jerk because they want to act like a jerk and you happen to be sitting in the wrong place at the wrong time. But mostly people who show up to readings, they want to see you succeed. Just like when we go to a play, we're on the actor's side. When we see improv, we're hoping that it all wraps up together at the end. We want to see success. And just reminding oneself of that, I find can be very useful, especially when it's a reading where there's a cover charge. Like, people paid money to see you. Nobody pays money just to be a jerk. Like, I shouldn't say nobody, but like, it's really rare for someone to be like, let me hand over $10 so I can go troll this poor writer. Yeah. Gabriel is a YouTuber and sometimes gives online master classes, often reading from a script, and in-person live events, but tends to feel a sore throat after an hour and a half of continuous talking, especially if I talk with emotion. Any tips regarding that besides water? Honey is your friend. That's the big one for me. Oh God. So I'll take like basically a shot of honey and then wash it down with soda. And it's a lot of sugar. But it helps kind of like coat the throat a bit. And then around the hour mark, I'll start to feel like a little like, but my fix for that is just not to be talking for that long. And for master classes, you, I assume, have to talk for an hour and a half. Throat coat tastes like hell, but it can be useful. And you wanna find your range of sustainable emotion, and sometimes that means engineering like a slower build. One thing that I learned from porn is if you start high, then you have to go higher. And if you start, goodbye cat. If you start a little more calm, that gives you more room. So then you're not frying your vocal cords on minute 60, you're frying them on minute 89, where you get to take a break and drink some tea and be kind to your body afterwards. What else can I babble about? Questions going once. Questions going twice. Okay, so we covered breathing. We covered being cartoony when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate. We covered pacing. Speaking of knowing your piece and knowing where your moments are, it can be difficult to look up and make eye contact with the audience without losing your place. So I do two things. I keep my thumb where I am. I keep my thumb where I am, so then when I look up, I know exactly where I'm going back to. And the other thing is memorization. Nudie Girl, I've done it so many times that I know my lines, where my moments are, and so it's fine. But for new pieces, I will write them over and over, by hand, in pen, in cursive, because it's easier on my wrist. These are details that you don't actually need. But I'll write it over and over to get it in my memory, so then I have the freedom during a reading to break away from the page and connect with the audience. Jim, do you ever write anything with reading it out loud in mind? This is how I write. I sit like this, or I sit like this, and I have a metronome like kind of motion, and I read everything out loud. Like I'll do a paragraph, and then everyone should know I have ADHD. It's managed with medication, kind of, but it's still like a very real thing in my life, very significant thing in my life. So I'll do my paragraph, and then I'll be like, where was I going with this? And then I'll read it out loud, and I'll go, oh, that doesn't flow. Hold on. And like go back and like massage a couple of words. So reading, specifically speaking it out loud, is a big part of my writing process. And the New York Times piece, the Can We Learn About Privacy from Porn Stars, that went through the editing machine so intensely that it doesn't flow the same way my personal work does. It's harder to read because, like, yes, it's precisely grammatically correct because the copy editor went line by line and was like, it's publicity, or there was something around publicity where they were like, they blew my mind with real grammar, and I was like, oh. And literally that's why I'm not teaching a writing class today, why I'm teaching reading, because I'm not actually a great writer. I wouldn't be able to explain to someone how to write. Anyway, back to the point. By the time something gets through multiple editors, it looks very different and it doesn't have the same flow. But when I was originally writing the piece, I'm here like a metronome, typing it out. And Emily, is there anything you would do differently in a paid reading versus a free reading where the audience might not be as familiar with your work? I did a reading in Portland with Notacult, where Jessica was the big star, and maybe like 3 or 4 people came for me. And I did it about the same, and if I had it to do over, I would have read a piece that provides more context. Most of the pieces in Philosophy, Pussycats, and Porn are personal sharing. I explain other people. Like, I explain, this is apneatic, this is her deal, here's how I know her. But at no point in the book do I explain, hi, I'm Stoya, here's my deal. The author bio is one of those, like, she's written for the New York Times, The Guardian, Playboy, she likes to act, she has 2 cats, boom. And that's really the most detail that I give as far as explaining myself. And should I ever do another group reading where there are lots of people who have no idea who I am, I would want to read a different piece that explains more about who I am, even though that would be very uncomfortable to write. Like really, really uncomfortable. I don't like the idea of that at all. That sounds terrifying. Let's see. I do a lot of readings in the sex work, either community or sex work platforms. So I pretty regularly, lately I cam every day somehow, one platform or another. And I've done a lot of reading in the cam room, and I've done a lot of readings where it's a collection of sex workers or an attempt to raise money for sex work charities. And so also that specific reading in Portland, I probably should have gone with a piece that explains sex work a bit as well, rather than one that presumes we all know sex work is real work, presumes that we all understand that these are consenting adults, so on and so forth. So that's definitely a note for me to take into future readings, is a different way of reading the room and knowing your audience. What level of understanding are they at? It's a good one. So would anybody like to read something of their own? Going once.
I could read something.
Awesome.
I'm scared, but I'll do it.
We're all going to be super nice and gentle, right? Yes.
I'll read part of a journal entry from when I quit my job to go live in a van, and I'm supposed to be traveling around the country right now, and that is not happening.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Where is it? All right. It's called Like Taking Off a Too Tight Shoe. Riot Girl. Anarchy in the UK. Bell Bottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion. I wasn't sure what I wanted to play, only that I wanted it to be raw, weird, and played at the highest possible volume. I circled the parking structure, wanting to feel more than I actually was as I checked out of work for the last time. Anxious, excited, uncharacteristically numb. My last day, the last shift I'll ever pull as an assistant. Goodbye, service industry. It's time to start living for me. As I drove down the freeway, I clawed at my heart and my throat, edging towards expansiveness, feeling anarchic and mostly just so fucking sick of being trapped in this too tight skin suit. There are marks from my fingernails along the edges of my neck, and I am singing. Am I weird enough to make a go of it professionally? I asked my girlfriend Alex in a text this afternoon. Do I deserve to fuck off and make art for a living? It's a reasonable question, worthiness. Wondering whether the goods you've got are good enough. I've spent so long justifying my oddball side hustles with a respectable desk job that it came as a shock to me when someone actually wanted to pay me money for them. I'll just stop there.
I like how the words rush out, because it seems like it's about feeling pent up and then escaping. I would suggest that you play with pacing a little bit and go from rushed to slowed down and then back to rushed. And I think that was very good. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks. I always get scared and then I know I rush a lot. So I think rehearsal is going to be my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. There's this, sorry, Pix. I gotta get the card. Hold on. Another acting trick. So high to low, fast to slow, loud to soft, and then you cross between these things. So you take one line. Does the bus have a toilet? I'm learning Serbian. It's fine. Does the bus have a toilet? 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 So you practice each line. It's part of the baking thing. You practice each line in these different ways. So you have this like almost like muscle memory kind of quality once you get in the reading, because until you get used to reading in front of a room full of people, it's gonna be stressful. And so having all these like different variety in speech already, like something you've done, something you've practiced, it's right there ready to come out of your mouth. That's really helpful once it's stage time. Anyone else? Oh, could you repeat that exercise? Gabriel, oh, yes. High to low, fast to slow, loud to soft, and then the X here is crossing between all of those things. So, does the bus have a toilet? I couldn't come up with a better phrase. I just had to go with what was on my desk. Yeah. Anyone else want to do a practice run?
Letitia, it looks like you've raised your hand if you want to chime in.
I have a question actually, to Stoya. I would like you to talk a bit more about how to keep eye contact with the audience without getting so nervous. Do you think it's easier to choose someone that seems more focused and connected with the reading, and always come back to the person, keeping eye contact with everyone, but eventually come back to the person that seems more connected?
So, it can definitely help to have a friend in the audience who can be your anchor. However, something that happens at higher levels of production is there's light on you and the audience is dark. So you actually can't see anyone. So you're trying to emote to this like blurry patch of humans and you can't make out a specific human. So sometimes I'll imagine that my friend is in the back of the room, and I will emote towards them, and then I'm making when you're, see how to explain it, when you're making eye contact with the front row, everyone else is kind of lost, and the further back you go, the more people you're reaching, which is why I'll aim for the back of the room. but it definitely helps with nerves to know, like, okay, these are my people. Like there's Steve, there's David, there's Jim, like whoever it is that's there. There's Smo. These are actual people who come to my stuff, and I feel supported when they're there. I feel like, okay, like I have people on my team. Not only is it, I'm aware that people mostly come to things and want to see them be successful, but I know like these are like actual humans that I have connections with who are on my side, and there to be supportive. So if all the lights are on, then absolutely make direct eye contact with people if you can handle it. But if you end up in a situation where it's more like a theater kind of setup and the lighting is such that you can't see the audience, then that's where your imagination comes in again. And you just imagine a person at the back of the room who you're speaking to. And if you want to get like really fancy with it, you can make eye contact over here and make eye contact over there and go back to it and make eye contact over there and like really do that. But if it's a distraction, it's better to just look up and then go back to it. Because it can be like every once in a while you meet someone's eyes and you're like, wow, we're having a moment and now I can't remember what I'm doing. Yeah. Okay, we have 30 minutes left. I don't know what I thought was going to take up all this time. Nobody has a hand up. So what shall we do? Anybody got any sort of more random questions? I want to, yes or nay? Oh, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. How has it been navigating the literary online writing world as a sex worker regarding your own history as a writer and performer? I'm a sex worker first. Like it's part of my identity. And the writing that I do is always an attempt to either untangle a misconception or answer a real question that somewhere between 1 and 100 people have asked. When we're talking about limp penises, thousands of people have asked about limp penises. So eventually I wrote about limp penises and how little I care about a penis being limp because there's so many other things you can do, right? So everything that I write comes from this desire to express my reality, my experience of the world as a sex worker. And lit dudes can be weird. I feel like literary women are also a little weird. I mean, let's be real, I'm super weird, but so it's not like weird's a bad thing, but lit dudes can be very they're awkward around open sexuality. So I don't interact much with the literary world because they're just trying to hit on you. Like I'm like, hey, I'd love to talk about words or semantics. I love talking about semantics, and they're trying to get my phone number. So I don't interact with that section of the world very much. And Jim has some great tips. We'll get to those in a minute. And mostly people want a memoir from me. They want, I'll quote one editor, a full and thorough accounting of the life and times of Stoya. And I'm like, that's not, I'm not ready to write a memoir. I'm 33. I'm ending the first chapter of my life, second chapter of my life, whatever. Like, I won't have the perspective and distance, like temporal distance, that's required to have that kind of perspective for another couple of decades. So that's been frustrating, where people are like, oh, we want you to write a book, and I'm like, here's what I want to write about, and they're like, memoir. Tell us about your first blowjob. And I'm like, that makes me uncomfortable because I wasn't 18, and from the context of being a porn star, that doesn't feel like an appropriate thing to share with the world. So that's a real frustrating thing for me. And I wrote Philosophy of Pussycats and Porn, and then publishers were like, we want a second book from you. And I'm like, sweet, here's what I want to write about. And they're like, memoir, full and thorough accounting of the life and times. And I'm like, but can I be memoiristic but talk about something greater than myself? Like, I'd like to do that. So that's been weird. Coming from pornography means that I'd already dealt with entertainment contracts. So I was better able to evaluate, like, what kind of outlets am I willing to work with, what amount of copyright am I willing to give up, which for a writer publishing something for the first time, you kind of feel like you have to take whatever is offered because they're giving you a platform. But I was able to use what I learned in pornography to work my way up the ladder. I mean, at first I was getting paid $50 a piece by Vice, and they were translating it into multiple languages. And then I was like, oh, like, the thing to do is to approach more serious outlets. And then you sort of build. But coming from porn, I had an easier time navigating the entertainment, legal, copyright, what all that is. And it's, you have to start somewhere, and you have to take the shit gigs that pay nothing and are frankly exploitative, and then you build to the point where you're actually getting paid something that almost compensates for the amount of time and effort it takes. But writing, it's not law, it's not doctoring. There is kind of a ceiling, no matter who you are, unless you're Nick Kristof or similar. They seem to be able to survive completely off their writing, and good for them. Jim has some 2 cents. If to your ear you sound like you're going too slow, realize you're not and slow down. 100% absolutely. When I feel like I must be boring the hell out of everyone, that's the sweet spot with cadence. especially when you're using words that are more complicated. Because a lot of people who care about books really care about language. So they may need a second to go, oh, that was a great turn of phrase. Or if you're really exercising your vocabulary to its fullest extent, there may be moments where you need to give like an extra 2 seconds for people to process the word that you just used, because it might not be at the front of their head, or at the front of their mind. And the other thing Jim suggests, when looking at the audience, look left, right, center during a natural pause before you start the next section. I agree about 75%. I think during a whole reading where it's like 30, 45 minutes, you want to sometimes look right, sometimes look left, sometimes do both if it's like a real big moment. But you don't want to be so practiced that it feels unnatural. So you want to vary, just like the X, the Roman 10. You want to have variety in there so it remains engaging. And obviously with video content, it's really just the camera, right? Like you have an audience of one right there. So that's where you want to be looking. All right, we've got about 15 minutes left. I am open to all sorts of questions at this stage. One of the things I like about readings is then people feel more comfortable telling me gently what could be better in my writing. They can be a really good opportunity to get feedback about what feelings a person experiences in response to the piece, and what people really respond to and what's kind of flat for them. And I'm able to take that into things that I write later on and hopefully do a better job.
What do you care about writing nowadays?
I'm half of Slate.com's How to Do It sex advice column with a delightful man named Rich Juzwiak. And that feels like I'm doing something that's actually helpful. People write in with their sex problems and also increasingly their relationship problems, which is out of my wheelhouse, but I have experts I can call for that. And the writing it's not as lyrical, it's not as visceral. I agreed to not use the F word, which is occasionally sad because one time I had the perfect place to say fuck a copter and I couldn't because it had the F word. And so we didn't get to use that bit. But that really fits with the reasons that I write, which is to express what it's like to be a sex worker in public, to explain the struggles and infrastructure issues, and to to help people normalize sexuality, to help people navigate sexuality. I feel like I'm living my best life when someone's like, all right, my husband's really tall and he wants me on top. How do we make this work? And I'm like, all right, I got this. Like, here's some positions. And I know a lot of writers love words, and that's their attraction to writing. And I do love words, but I write to help ease the problems we have around sex. So doing the advice column is really great for me. And I have a project that I should be working on, but COVID and my brain just like can't deal with anything over 1,200 words right now. And so I'm trying to figure out how to break it into smaller chunks. But it's, again, an endeavor that attempts to explain and humanize pornography and adjacent forms of sex work. So it just all comes back to that for me. And I sort of envy people who can just write something beautiful. Who can just like sit down and make something beautiful with words and have it be beautiful and literary. And I'm like, I can't write unless I feel like there's something I have to say. Yeah. Emily, do you keep a daily writing practice or journal? I do not. There was a period in my life where I was writing every day and posting the good stuff. And now, I run 2 companies. There's always a lot of like words being typed every day. But I'm not as focused on writing for publication. And if it's not for publication, I just can't. Like I'll like sit down and go like, paper, words. I should words. These words are stupid. I feel stupid. This is making me feel bad. I'm gonna pet the cat. I'm gonna handle an email, commission an artist, send a wire transfer, update a spreadsheet, like do the things that feel good. And then when I do write, it's because I'm like, oh, this thing just happened and it's a really important teachable moment, or oh, there's this question that actually deserves to be like fully answered in a thorough way, so let me sit down and do that. Leticia, can you tell us about your editing process? It varies wildly. So if it's one of the more memoristic pieces in my book, icons, but what is porn, etc., I edit as I go. And it's a really inefficient process. A lot of people use outlines and they know where they're going with the piece and they know what they're going to hit on the way. And I don't do that because ADHD. So I'll read the first paragraph and then I'll write half of the next paragraph. And then I'll read and make changes to that half and continue and finish it and then read it from the top. And like the process repeats with each bit. And then when it's for Slate, like I write my copy, I send it to the editor, they change words around to make it fit with their style guidelines. Sometimes they have a question that's like, hey, we don't know what you were saying here, or sorry, you can't say that, or you forgot to do the like, hey, what you're going through sucks, so we put that in. And it's very capitalist and professional, right? Like, it's this factory, the deadlines have to be hit. If I'm on an airplane, if we ever get back to the point where airplanes are a thing, and they need to put it live, then it's going live without my approval. If I'm not able to access my email in time and approve edits and like write my own line that got left out, then it just goes. The New York Times, I rewrote from scratch 3 times my first piece. And from there, it went to fact checking, and some phrases had to be changed to fit, to like work within the fact checking guidelines. Like, for instance, Tara Patrick says she changed her name because I wasn't able to find like an actual like official name change paper. And from there, it went up to the editor's quorum, and then they had questions. And then the whole like ending had to be rewritten to cater to their questions, because New York Times is such a broad platform that you really do have to explain a lot of things. You know that you're speaking to people that may know absolutely nothing about pornography or whatever the subject is. And other places I've written for, they do very basic edits, and some places are very like, oh, I'd like to hear more in this direction, and others are like line by line, like, we need a line here that explains this, we need a line here that sets up this point. So the editing process varies wildly, and for me, it's just whatever the publication likes to do. Like, I'm still in a phase where I'm like, oh, this is a different way of doing things, maybe I'll learn something. E is writing a script for a very short film about domestic violence and having some challenge balancing writing for artistic beauty and to inform an audience. Any tips on writing for the audience with difficult content versus making a piece? I don't know anything about film, really. I know how to act, sort of. I don't know about writing for film. So that may be more about making sure the artistic beauty is there in the visuals, which comes down to like, do you trust the director you're working with to put the lyricism and artistry there? When you're dealing with difficult subjects, you do have to deal with the reality. I mean, you don't have to, but if you make a movie about porn and you don't mention the difficulties with infrastructure, then porn people are going to be like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Domestic violence, I'm sure there are lots of people in the world who have experienced it. I am also sure that a number of different people are all going to have their individual experiences and responses, and it's going to be very very unique to them. So what I would suggest is pick a story and tell it. Tell the truth of that story and rely on phrasing and lighting, post-production, the look of things to make it beautiful and evocative. Does that help? Okay, I got an awesome. Hopefully that means I helped. Anna, I haven't written a novel, but I write short stories. What is your take on writing endings? I have a number of stories that are unfinished. I have a lot of stuff that's unfinished too. I have God, my whole adult life's worth of computers that have died living in my dad's basement. We call it the laptop graveyard. And the hard drives are full of pieces where I wrote 2/3 of it and didn't have an ending, and it never saw the light of day. Like what Emily was asking about earlier with like writing every day. When I was writing every day, I threw away a lot of stuff. Like I would have this like pages document, or I'd have like a note on my phone. It's really, I don't know why I was doing that to myself, trying to like write an essay with my thumbs. But I have all these like bits and pieces just laying around that didn't have an ending, and that's totally fine. You know, in art, a lot of people, visual art, a lot of people will make a bunch of like basic sketches, and then you decide what to throw away, right? You go like, this one's good, this is the direction we're going in, take all this, get rid of it. And it is very much okay to let something sit, or walk away from it. And you know, it's anybody who tries to tell you that everything they do is perfect or everything they do gets finished is probably a little bit deluded. Because I feel like other writers that I've talked to, like they also have a lot of unfinished stuff, and that's fine. It's part of the creative process. All right, we've got time for one more question if anyone has anything. Widget's coming to say hello. Hi, Widge. Yes. That's also perfectly okay, Anna. There's nothing wrong with keeping all of that work, especially because you may find your ending, right? And then it would be a shame to have lost all of that. I read Elements of Style when I was a kid and nothing stuck. My editor can tell you nothing stuck. I should probably go back and reread it. I bet Slate would be really happy if I went back and reread it. If this were a cam show, I'd be showing everyone the cat right now. Jim has a copy older than me. Hi, Puff. Hi, where'd you go? Come on, Puff. He's more interested in marking the laptop. That's Widget. He is a sweetie and a muffin. So thank you so much for coming. I hope I was able to be somewhat useful. I appreciate you all taking the time to come listen to me babble about reading stuff and writing stuff. A bunch of people asked great questions. Thank you for that. And Emily, thank you for volunteering. I think you can definitely lean into your feelings and deliver some great readings.